Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Steve Dace here alongside my co-host, Aaron McIntyre. Good to see you again, Aaron. As the season draws nigh, I think the Big Ten is the first conference now to have, even ahead of the SEC, is the first conference to have all of its teams' football programs back on campus, getting tested, getting into shape, getting ready for the start of this season. We're seeing the college football preseason magazines out there on the newsstands as more and more things are beginning to reopen. Slowly but surely, it is starting to feel just 3 days from today.
It's crazy.
Is when the football season is scheduled to begin. So I thought what would be a fun thing is over the next 2 episodes, one of my favorite things to read in the college football preview magazines are the anonymous coach quotes.
Yep.
That Athlon puts out every year. And one of the things you probably don't know, if you haven't covered a team professionally like I've been able to do in a past life, and you get access to coaches, you find out they're actually far worse gossips than even the media is. That most of the rumors we get in the media actually come from the coaches. They're gossiping about each other. They're dishing on each other. It's a very catty
which is
vocation.
Hard to believe with some of their personas,
yes,
if you want to call them that.
Yeah, it can get very catty, though. All right. And so I thought this week we would take a look. I picked them myself, and I'll let you react, Aaron. But I thought this week we would take a look at what I thought were the top 5 anonymous coach quotes about teams in the Big Ten West for the Big Five. And then next week we'll do the same thing for the Big Ten East and find out what coaches around the league really think when they don't have to put their name on it and own it.
Sure.
All right. All right, let's begin. Let's start with Minnesota. All right, and here were the anonymous coach quotes from Athlon's and what it said about that guy right there, PJ Fleck, and his program at Minnesota.
Here's what Athlon says: there's a type of player that clicks with a personality like PJ Fleck. That's the success they're having. PJ has polarized a lot of coaches in the league. No one wants to knock a guy when he's having success, though. If it's successful, you can't argue it, but it's a style that a lot of other coaches don't like.
This struck me as PJ Fleck's peers, or at least the ones that are quoted here, would like him to fail. And I think this happens, whether you like PJ Fleck or not, Aaron, I think this just happens when you're a paradigm changer, shifter, when you do things differently. He certainly has a unique way of doing things, approach, culture building, right? Okay. But it does strike me as those quotes said to me, hey, his peers would like to see him not be successful at this.
Polarizing personality. Great observation, Sherlock. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean,
it's
yes,
a tad obvious.
That's his shtick.
You would think I would recognize a polarizing personality when I see one of all people, right?
Whether it's his shtick or that's who he really is, that's just his natural way of going about things. That's just the way it is. It's just patently obvious that PJ Fleck is polarizing. He polarizes basically anybody who follows and pays attention and cares about Big Ten football. As far as the subtext there, they want him to fail. I think that probably rings true, because whether you like him or you don't like him, think of a guy like Kirk Ferentz, who's been around for 20 years, Pat Fitzgerald, who's been around for a long time in the Big Ten West. Think of a guy like Barry Alvarez sitting over in Wisconsin, who's had a lot of success for a lot of years over there. And you see this new hotness come in, and he's very, very engaging. He's very, very, like we said, polarizing. He can be a lightning rod as well. He's basically leading a religious sect over in Minneapolis. For all intents and purposes, this guy comes in there, and in a few seasons, he's got him winning 10 games. All right, there's a little bit of, I don't know if it's jealousy or wait a minute. You gotta earn your stripes a little bit slower than that, Mr. Fleck. So I think there's probably a little bit of, hey, let's tamp this down just a little bit. And I think it probably just stems from the pettiness that you were talking about before, just a little bit of jealousy.
Okay. Let's go to Nebraska next. And here's what they had to say in Athlon's The Anonymous Coach quotes about the Huskers.
It turns out it's harder to fix this program than everyone in the media thinks. I'll give Scott Frost credit. I think he knew they weren't even close. I think the staff did everything they could to dial all those expectations down. He's never said this was going to be a quick fix. Nobody but that staff knows what they walked into. It's becoming obvious it was probably worse than we knew.
So what do you think? Scott Frost being credited with self-awareness, because I got to tell you, what I have noticed in the 2 seasons he's coached there is the exact opposite. That he deflects all blame, throws the players under the bus constantly, and yet the other coach's perspective around the league is, hey, they think this guy's actually managing expectations well, given what the state of the program was when he came in. What do you think, Aaron? Not buying it?
No, this strikes me like, I don't know, when a rival, I don't know if this ever happened to you. If you really screwed up big time in a public profession where it's very, very competitive, in a competitive environment, and a rival comes up to you and congenially says, it's going to be all right. Just keep doing what you're doing. Because they want you to screw up and they want you to fail. That's what that struck me as. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading way too much into that. Yeah. But that's kind of what that struck me as. This is
Tom Izzo's act. He does this at Michigan State every year. Whatever coach is on the hot seat, I promise you, Izzo's going to come to his defense. Mm-hmm. And I've just come to the conclusion he's just decided I'd like to keep kicking that guy's ass, right?
Yeah.
All right. I don't want that school to go out and get a better coach than that, right? I mean, I remember when he spoke glowingly about Tommy Amaker at Michigan when he could not take us to the tournament in 6 years.
Yep.
Okay. So you sense that there's a little bit of that kind of po-boying going on right here, a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Keep Mr. Overrated right there in Lincoln, Nebraska, where he can't hurt me. All right. Okay.
Northwestern's the next one. They say this of Pat Fitzgerald. Last year was worst case scenario for them. You can assume it was a 1-year problem. They went through a new quarterback every week, it felt. We think they're going to bounce back. Just starting a single quarterback would go a long way to getting them back to winning. This isn't a broken program.
See, this is my view. This is the first one we came to where the anonymous coach quote perspective is almost exactly the same as my own. All right, so this is my view of their program. Now, I will admit I'm biased here because I love this guy right here. I got a major man crush on this guy right here. Okay, so I could be biased here, but I just saw a team where everything that could go wrong went wrong. Aaron, they lost 5 games last year where the opponent scored less than 21 points. That is really hard to do in modern high-scoring college football, right? I just think that's an outlier based on what he has done throughout his career up until this point. And I think Peyton Ramsey is perfect for what we have seen, the C.J. Bechet's, the Dan Persas. He is cut right from that exact same cloth. And just having a competent quarterback, I think can make a huge difference because a lot of this defense is coming back, and it's been good the last few years. But so that's a rosy outlook for a team that went from 8-1 to 1-8 in the league. All right, but I mean that's my take on it. Is what that anonymous coach quote was.
I think this is a fair assessment because we think they're going to bounce back. That doesn't mean they're going to go to 8-4 now. The bounce back, I mean, it's easy to bounce back.
Eligibility.
And I keep saying this, it's easy to bounce back from that offensive performance because that was a very, very bad, a record-setting bad, probably, offensive performance from them. So I think it's a fair assessment because it is true that basically everything that went wrong, especially at the most important position on the field in college football, which is quarterback, and it was perception, and it was reality to some degree that it seemed like they had a different quarterback out there every single week. Those things just happened, and it's unlucky, for lack of a better word. It's just unfortunate for Northwestern. Like that coach said, everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
To put in perspective how bad it was for them last year, If not for the historical ineptitude of 2018 Rutgers, which became the first Big Ten team, I want to say since Indiana in like 1993 or 1991, something like around there. Or no, it was Minnesota. I'm sorry. The first Big Ten team since Minnesota in 1991 to finish last in the nation in total offense. That's hard for an FBS team to do, particularly in one of the better FBS leagues, right? And so if not for that historical ineptitude from Rutgers 2018, Northwestern offensively last year, that would have been the worst offensive performance by a team in this league in like 3 decades.
That's impressive in a bad way, in a very bad way.
All right, let's get to Purdue. Are they maybe a candidate to be a surprise team and bounce back?
The coaches say of Purdue, they could be a surprise team coming off last year. No one is really paying attention to them, and most of the problems they had last year seemed temporary and not a system failure. They were decimated by injuries last year. A little bit of reality set in on these guys last year, but Jeff Brom has a lot of respect in this league.
I agree with a lot of that. I mean, I like the makeup of their team. They returned the last 2 Big Ten freshmen of the year, and they're going to play next to each other. Pretty, I think, devastating wide receiver tandem of David Bell and Rondale Moore. My big issue with them, here's why. They're the kind of team like Minnesota was last year. You know, I love the contrarian play. And Minnesota was my pick to win the West last year. Remember how I got mercilessly mocked for it the entire summer? And then they darn near ended up winning the thing. Purdue is exactly the kind of team I like to roll with. The schedule is what gives me pause. Their schedule is not forgiving. And so I see a team that I think has 8 or 9 win talent, but could struggle to get to bowl eligibility or just above that given the schedule. And that's what's holding me back from going all the way in. I think we just talked about how historically inept Northwestern was on offense last year. Purdue was as devastated by injury as any team I've ever seen as a Big Ten football fan last year.
I think this is another fair assessment again, because you look at what they put out there, and everybody remembers Ohio State, that Ohio State game a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
They are scary. When they're clicking, they're really scary on offense, and if they can get a defense that's at least competent, then they the sky is the limit for them. But again, injuries at key positions, at the positions that they need to accentuate, to be able to, exploit, kind of the niche that they have found, which is having an explosive offense. So you think of the wide receiver position, the quarterback position, lots of question marks last year. Those things, like the quote said, those things are not system failures. Those are not system failures. Those are just things that can be fixed with development and by extension, time. Moving on to Illinois. Do you want to go to them?
Let's go to the Illini next. Can they repeat last year's surprise?
So the quote is, we saw a big jump in their overall talent level. They're still thin, and they're still capable of falling apart if the right injuries hit them. With their lack of depth, it's hard to see them making a huge jump. There's still a lot left to work on here.
So Illinois last year had the second most non-offensive touchdowns in all of college football. And even with that massive outlier of a stat, was 6-6, right? So you can't count on being number 2 in the country in non-offensive touchdowns 2 years in a row. Hell, you can be a fan of a team your entire life and not see that happen to them one time. All right. So you do wonder about a regression to the mean, but there's also more talent coming back on this team. I think people forget Brandon Peters has another year. They're bringing more back on this team than we thought. They've got some transfers that, like a Luke Ford, who was a big time recruit. Remember, that's the kid that they didn't give the waiver to because his grandfather, whatever, lived 20 miles outside of the 100-mile cutoff for a family illness. Right. So they're bringing in more transfers. The non-conference schedule for them is a cream puff. But this could be the kind of team, go back to our episode last week. If Iowa has a difficult season because of what's going on with their program off the field, that suddenly makes a road game at Illinois a much more treacherous trip for Iowa this fall.
They had trouble with them last year.
Than it has been the last few years. And you're right, Illinois did play Iowa tough last year. And that could be so when we talked last week that if Iowa goes from an 8-win team to a 6-win team, that changes, that reverberates throughout the entire Big Ten West, because that means another win or two for somebody else, right? Illinois could be that kind of team that's another win for if Iowa struggles to get solid footing as a team this fall.
Yeah, I want to see a good Illinois in the Big Ten. I want to see that, and so I think my analysis is a little bit changed. This is for real,
not a pearl clutch?
Well, no, this is for real.
Okay,
I mean, it's like having a good Nebraska. Nebraska helps the overall brand of the Big Ten, so I want a good Nebraska as much as I want to kick their butt every single Black Friday, or not anymore.
Not anymore, yeah.
Every single time. So, solid teams are good for the Big Ten, especially when you're in a recruiting area like Illinois is in. I mean, they could recruit the heck out of Chicago, if they actually wanted to, it seems like. But so all of that is to say, this analysis is kind of tinged by wanting Illinois and kind of being hopeful for Illinois. The Iowa-Illinois rivalry, if there was one, that could be a fun thing. I just don't know what to expect. If they have as much production, just solid production from transfers hitting the transfer portal like they did last season, there's reason to hope there. There's definitely reasons to hope, but transfers, there's a reason why these guys are transferring, whether they're just not good enough, there's issues off the field, what have you. It's kind of a crapshoot. So I think Illinois could be a crapshoot again this year. They just got lucky, as you noted, the outlier statistic as far as turnovers go. They got lucky. They forced their own luck, what have you. That's an outlier statistic. If they can hit snake eyes again, or whatever the good one is, then, they could have a decent season again this year.
All right. That's the Big Five on Bigger Ten. Anonymous coach quotes about the Big Ten West. We'll do the Big Ten East next week. But when we come back, it's our weekly game of Would You Rather.
Bigger Ten is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
It's our weekly game of Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. Aaron, I begin with you. Would you rather be Pat Fitzgerald or Jeff Brom, so Northwestern or Purdue? Which of those two coaches would you rather be trying to bounce back this year?
Jeff Brom. More tools in the toolbox, I think. Now, you build great teams and you build a lasting foundation with defense. I get that. But it's not like it's impossible to develop a defense and make huge strides in a year or two. And I would expect Purdue could, it's possible for them to do that. But defense, it's really, really difficult to have game changers at a consistent snap-by-snap level. It's just a lot harder because of the nature of the position and because of the skill position players on the other side of the ball. It's just really hard to have a game wrecker snap in and snap out on defense more than it is on offense. And right now, I think Jeff Brom and Purdue definitely have more tools in the toolbox on the offensive side of the ball that I think it's going to be easier to build around, or at least give your defense, not put them in so many precarious situations like Northwestern did with their defense last year. Because you start putting your defense's backs up against the wall, drive in and drive out. I mean, it's just a matter of time before it breaks. So I just think Jeff Brom has an easier path to bouncing back than Pat Fitzgerald does.
Okay.
Next one is for you. Would you rather have your team pushed to the limit in week 1 or play a cupcake in week 1 and roll?
I think it depends on who we play in week 2. And I mean, I remember when Iowa should have lost to Northern Iowa in week 1, right?
2009.
Yeah, and that team ended up winning a BCS bowl game and finishing the top 10 of the country, as I recall. So if we're playing somebody tough in week 2, I don't mind kind of a scare there a little bit. If guys were over, especially if, guys came in maybe a little fat and sassy, a little arrogant, kind of resting on their laurels. That wake-up call against somebody that you were supposed to roll in week 1, and then it kind of reverses the market. Everybody's picking against you. You get the chip on your shoulder. If we're playing a tough one in week 2, like if I'm Texas and I got to go to LSU in week 2, I don't mind. If I'm Tom Herman, I don't mind if we get a scare in week 1 and kind of everybody's against us and Texas is not back and is overrated again. I kind of can rally my team around that. We go on the road and the snake pit at Death Valley. It's us against the world. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But if the next week we're playing a cupcake too, and we don't, then I'm concerned if we get a scare, because that tells me maybe guys are kind of not focused right now, right? So
sure.
My answer to this question comes down to who we play in week 2. If in week 2 it's a tough game, I don't mind getting a scare. If week 2 though is another cupcake, I'm a little more concerned then. All right, this one's for you. Would you rather be Kirk Ferentz, having to rebuild your own culture? So put together the culture that is kind of in shambles right now and put it back together right before the start of a season. Or would you rather be Greg Schiano and having to rebuild your own program? People forget when they were in the old Big East. I mean, this is a historical loser at Rutgers. He had this team at one point number 2 in the country. All right. So what's harder to do in a short amount of time? Kirk Ferentz rebuilding the pieces of his culture, or after being away for about a decade, Greg Schiano rebuilding the program at Rutgers that he originally rebuilt the first time?
This one's difficult, which means it's a good one, because we don't really know the depth to which Iowa's culture has been affected.
Sure.
I mean, it is there. We went through that all last week, but we don't know for sure with the guys in the locker room right now. We don't know if they're looking over their shoulder and looking at Kirk Ferentz in a different light right now. I've heard numerous accounts saying that, Kirk Ferentz this is kind of what he was built for, best, whatever. So we don't really know the depth to which this has affected how the players right now in the locker room view him. By all accounts, it seems like things are about as good as you could hope for with Kirk Ferentz, which is why I'm going to go with him rather than trying to rebuild the cratering Rutgers. Overall, in the long term, Rutgers, if Greg Schiano is successful in exploiting the talent out east there, Rutgers could be good. They could be decent. But right now, I think I'd rather be Kirk Ferentz because I think there's more of a foundation already built in. And from what I've heard, it seems like players are not looking at him like he's going to, I don't know, fill in the blank there. So I think the level of cratering is deeper at Rutgers than it has been at Iowa.
It's also tougher to rebuild this in the Big Ten East than it was in the old Big East as well.
You got that right.
Where even if you do everything right, you probably have 3 losses in your conference schedule before the season begins every single year, right? Minimum, right? So you didn't have that in the Big East.
Next one, this is for you. Would you rather be Minnesota and lose in week 1 or Iowa and lose in week 1?
Oh, I would.
And if you need a little bit more context, then I can give it to you. But
yeah, Iowa plays Northern Iowa week 1, right? Minnesota plays, is it BYU who Minnesota plays week 1?
I can look that up real quick.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I'd much rather be Minnesota and lose week 1. I think it is imperative that Iowa gets off to a good start.
Yep.
I think, and I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but Northern Iowa is top 5 in the FCS and all these preseason magazines.
Yeah, don't look now.
This is supposed to be one of Mark Farley's best teams he's had there. So, and remember, they scared the hell out of Iowa State last year, recall. And that whole team is essentially back this year. So I think it is imperative for Iowa to get off to a good start. I think the more you can build momentum with an esprit de corps, and it feels like you have positive momentum building to something, A, it puts everybody back on the same page faster. B, it keeps everybody on that same page longer. Okay? I think PJ Fleck strikes me as the kind of coach that, I go back to what Chris Berman used to say about the old Buffalo Bills. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills, right? PJ Fleck strikes me as the kind of coach that in the environment when they lose a game, they have no business losing and everybody's against them, where his culture would thrive in a moment like that, okay? So I think there's a much better chance Minnesota gets back up off the mat than Iowa does. I think it is an absolute imperative. If Iowa has a shockingly good season, it's not going to be, I cannot foresee a scenario where it's they started 1-1 or 0-2 or 1-3 and then went on a roll. I can't see that happening. All right. To me, I think it's the other way around. They smoke UNI, beat Iowa State again, and then we're sitting here in the third week of the season like, remember when we thought Chris Doyle was a thing, and they got it rolling, right? I think Minnesota is much more likely to take a punch to the mouth and then get back up after that. This season.
That's what I wanted to know.
All right, we'll come back with our Twitter poll and question of the week next.
Bigger Ten is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll results: what is more likely to happen this season? And we had a lot of reaction to this. All right. Only 19% said they thought that it was the most likely scenario out of these four that Wisconsin would go 8-4. 23% thought it was the most likely Illinois would go to a bowl game again. Only 10% thought it was most likely that Minnesota would win 10 games again, or 10 plus games again. The overwhelming winner, I'm not surprised that so much that this one is number one. I'm shocked though at the margin that Purdue will improve by 3 wins. Now, that was supposed to be 3+ wins, but I couldn't put the plus in there. It was too many characters. But your thought on those results, are you as surprised as I am that massive rebound by Purdue is the overwhelming winner?
See, that's the one that I voted for, actually. And then like an hour later, I was thinking about it randomly, and I had buyer's remorse because I think it should be a lot closer between Wisconsin, actually, and Purdue. Because I think Wisconsin, as we've talked about, how do you replace a Jonathan Taylor? Answer is you don't. And when you don't have a ton of weapons, at least not that we know of, on the offensive side of the ball, and you know, you're going to be stout on defense again, but you're losing a lot there. I think it's a lot higher likelihood than people maybe want to admit that Wisconsin could go 8-4. But I do think Purdue, I do think that should be the winner, but I actually think it's Wisconsin that should be a little bit closer than that.
This week's question of the week from DC Badger. You guys tweeted that former Iowa quarterback Nate Stanley went 9-0 in rivalry games against Iowa State, Minnesota, and Nebraska. But how did he do against his other rival, Wisconsin? Aaron, your thoughts?
Well, I wonder where DC Badger comes from. I wonder what fan,
Very subtle name. I'm not exactly sure who he roots for. Yes.
Yeah, he was poopy. He was very poopy against Wisconsin. Did I say that he was poopy? I wish I had the stats up right now. But remember when Iowa just handed Ohio State their butts?
And then the next week went to Wisconsin.
And then the next week they went to Wisconsin,
right.
And they had, I don't think they gained a single first down that game. I'm dead serious.
Or at least it
wasn't converting a third down, but I'm pretty sure they didn't even didn't even gain a first down that game. I mean, and a lot of it had to do, and I don't know. Nate Stanley had some amazing moments, but when it was against Wisconsin, especially when the games were on the line, just critical mistakes.
So he's an Iowa quarterback. When the game's on the line against Wisconsin, doesn't deliver.
Well,
that's kind of been the Iowa program. That Wisconsin has been Iowa's poor man's Ohio State, is for me as a Michigan fan, for several years now, right? They have been the impediment in the one win you have against them is similar to the one win Michigan has against Ohio State in the last 15 years, was the one year that they were on probation with an interim coach, right? And we still almost lost that game.
Yeah.
The one win you guys have is Wisconsin fumbled at the goal line before scoring what would have been the winning touchdown, right?
Yeah. I mean, I will say though, it takes the sting off though when you have 100% more wins against Ohio State than Michigan does in the last decade. It does take the sting off of those types of factoids, but it doesn't make it any less true.
And you suck. Anyway, that'll be it for this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Next week, the Big Five. We'll look at how anonymous coaches around the league feel about what's going on in the Big Ten East. Don't forget, you can follow us at Bigger Ten on Twitter. If you like this podcast, if you're listening to the audio version, please hit that subscribe button and give us a 5-star review if you like us. Give us a like and a subscribe here on this video and a share on YouTube as well. Until next time, we'll see you next week right here on Bigger Ten.